Hello, my name is Carolyn Schuyler,
And my name is Chloe Wilson.
and we're both here today. So happy to have this time to share with you a presentation on crafting a self-care practice in nature. And we're thrilled to be able to do this because both of us are so passionate about the ways that nature can support us both emotionally as well as physically. So we're going to be sharing ideas with you today that are highly practical that you can begin to implement no matter where you live or what your circumstances are to help yourself improve your quality of life, because we know from a lot of research over many decades that nature connection is a vital part of feeling well. So my background is I'm actually a psychotherapist, and for many years I worked helping people recover from trauma and depression and anxiety. And about 5 years ago, I launched a nonprofit called Wild Rock, which is a nature play and discovery center that also does ecotherapy work in rural Virginia. And I was excited to dive into this work in a natural setting because I have had so many experiences as a therapist observing how folks that have a practice of getting into nature often, or were fortunate enough to grow up being allowed to play freely in nature, really rely in beautiful ways on the support of the natural world to recover from traumatic events and to find ways of caring for depression and anxiety and seeing improvements in it in the process. And I know, Chloe, you've had a lot of experiences in your professional work as well.
Yeah, so I am a school counselor. I've worked in an elementary setting, and I currently work in a middle and high school setting. And I had the pleasure of meeting Carolyn around 5 years ago, or maybe four, when Wild Rock was getting started. And at that point in time, I was a fairly new counselor, and I began to implement some of the nature practices with my students. And I just saw the incredible difference that it made and the self-regulatory benefits it had on my students. That, even the most escalated person could become calmer and become more able to communicate after spending time in nature. And so I'm really passionate about this work, and I'm really fortunate now to work in a school that has a lot of green spaces available to students, and I've just seen the difference that makes in their day, just having time where they are outside.
So this is what's driving us to share this information with you today, with the hope that after your time with us, you'll be inspired to think about how nature can support you in your life right now, and to make a plan that's unique to you, that you can be excited about, and even start right away, even start today potentially with some of these practices.
So self-care, that is something that we are hearing a lot about right now. People are really interested in how to take care of themselves and struggling to do so right now with everything going on in the outside world. There's so many different aspects to self-care. And the thing that's amazing about nature is that it really touches on every part of this wheel. So the physical self can be cared for in nature because when we're out there, we're walking and we're getting exercise. The psychological and emotional parts of ourself can be also benefit from being in nature and the relaxation it promotes. And spiritually, for so many people, being in nature, it inspires feelings of awe and feelings that we're part of something greater and that we are not alone. So those are just a few of the ways that nature can promote self-care.
And even people that are wanting to do better in their job performance can benefit from nature, because we know that performance is enhanced. People have better attention, better ability to focus and get work done when they've taken time to take breaks in nature. So it's exciting to think that something that is free and available to us all in some capacity, whether it's looking out a window or getting into a park, we all have access to something that is very powerful for improving our sense of well-being. So I wanted to just share some information from the field of positive psychology, The field of positive psychology is really interested in what makes people thrive as opposed to what causes people difficulty. So the researchers in this field had a real interest in understanding what is it that makes people happy. And the research suggests that this is what we call the happy pie chart here, that there is a genetic component, which is not surprising to those of you that spend time with children that might be parents. You may have noticed that there are some children in your family that just seem to be naturally happy, while others may struggle with keeping a steady level of happiness. It just seems to be wired that way. And there is some truth to that, that we do have a genetic component. But there is also a component to happiness that has to do with our circumstances. And surprisingly, it's only 10%. The bulk of what we have control over is our intentional activities. And that is 40% of happiness. And if you think about it, that's a pretty big percentage. That if we actually plan activities that support our wellness and make a regular habit of engaging in those activities, we can actually change our experience of our daily life. And we're hoping today in talking about nature that perhaps you'll feel a little bit more intentional about incorporating nature into your practices for self-care.
We want to address that using the word self-care can make it feel like we're putting the onus for well-being on the individual when there are so many other factors that can affect mental health. As you can see in this graphic, we need to be thinking as a society about moving towards a model of community care where all individuals are equally supported and nurtured in their access to self-care opportunities.
So we wanted to say a little bit about what we know about being stress hardy, being resilient, because so much about self-care is developing our resilience intentionally. And what I think is very hopeful is that there's a lot of evidence that it's not necessarily the amount of stress you're experiencing that determines its impact. It's how you cope with it and respond to it. And there is evidence that folks that are able to view their stressor as a challenge, as an opportunity to learn and develop new skills, tend to move through that with less difficulty. And folks that can take on a sense of commitment to doing something deliberately that is going to be supportive, to give a chance for hope, to move forward towards something positive, and having that sense of I can make a difference for myself by consciously going after some new goal. That sense of commitment is very important, as is the ability to identify those parts of your life that you do have control over. Because there are many aspects we don't, but there are ways in an everyday life that we can identify things we do have control over. And we selected this beautiful urban picture of lots of color and green roofs and beautiful trees, because I feel like this is an example of a community exercising stress resilience and hardiness. Because urban settings, we know, are inherently stressful, because biologically people are designed to be in nature. Our ancestors throughout most of human history, it's only been a very short period of human history that we've lived primarily indoors. We biologically are designed to be in the stimulation of the natural world, not so much in indoor settings. So urban settings are a stressor on us, whether we're conscious of it or not, because of the lack of green space and the noise level and a variety of other factors. Sometimes it's air pollution, congestion. A lot of factors can be a low-grade stress that's going on all the time. So here is an urban community that chose to use color and green roofs. They found what they could control. They could control the color of buildings and what they did with open spaces on the top of buildings. They took the effort to commit to making these changes, which I'm sure was a huge expense and quite a lot of coordination and effort on many people's parts to organize to get this painted in this way and to create these gardens. And in the process, they did take on a challenge that I'm sure was a learning experience that was beneficial for everybody that was involved. So it's just a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit, that even changing settings is possible to support us. And certainly in our personal lives on a smaller scale, we can always look for what we have control over, what we can commit to, and how we can view things as a challenge for ourselves, not in a way to be overly self-critical or to put too high expectations on ourselves, but to remember that there are things that we can do to make a difference.
And one thing I wanted to say about that slide was it makes me think about if we can, as individuals, make a commitment to getting out in nature, and we can work on challenging ourselves to turn off the screens for a little bit. That is an example of something that we can control. And just using nature as a time to control that screen intake and the media intake that is so pervasive right now is just one small thing we can challenge ourselves to do, but it can make such a huge difference for our mental health. So
Yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Carolyn.
I was just going to add, have you heard the phrase digital detox?
Oh, yeah.
I love that phrase, the idea that we all need periods to actually detox from just all of the time we have to spend with electronic devices, and that it can help us really reset, to give a designated period, even if it's just an afternoon, to not be connected. So I just wanted to build on that, because I've always loved that phrase, digital detox, because I think it's just a reminder that we all need it periodically.
Absolutely.
Which feeds right into this next image.
So we've been talking about how beneficial nature is, and there's quite a few studies that just observing images of nature is so beneficial for our mental health. So like we talked about on the self-care wheel earlier, even if your office doesn't have a window, you could put up some images of nature in your office. In fact, when I worked in an elementary school, one of my students noted that I did not have any windows, and she created fake windows using pictures of nature in my office, and I kept them up, and they were really lovely. So we're just going to do a quick guided imagery here, and we're going to show a couple different images of nature because different scenes appeal to different people. And what I'd love you to do right now as you are listening is just take a minute to make sure your body is comfortable, you're relaxed in your chair, or maybe you're lying down. And just take a few slow, deep breaths just to center yourself as you observe this image. And try to put yourself in this landscape and feel everything that you would feel being here. What would you smell? What might you hear? And just fill in all the different sensory details that you would experience being in this scene here. For many of us, water is a very soothing, calming thing to be around. And some of us might prefer the next image that we can go to here of a peaceful forest. And there's actually a term called forest bathing, which I know Carolyn knows a lot about, and a practice that some people participate in. So if you are more drawn to images of the forest, I'm going to ask that you take this scene in as well. Feel the warmth of the sunlight. And just notice how that is impacting you. How you feel different than before viewing these images.
Thank you, Chloe. I'm so glad you brought up forest bathing. So I'm just going to say a little bit about that for folks that have not heard of it. So the concept of forest bathing actually comes from Japan. In Japan, they have a very devoted National Park Service that prioritizes human health and well-being. They've spent millions of dollars researching what kinds of trails and what kind of woodland settings are most beneficial for people's health. And through that process, they have designated certain trails around the country that are evidence-based for helping to boost the immune system, reducing the symptoms of depression, and helping people to feel physically well in general. And so the practice that they promote on these trails, they call it Shenren Ryoku, which is translated to forest bathing. And it's not a literal bathing like going into a bathtub. It's more about sensory bathing, allowing all of your sensory attunement to be in the present moment with whatever you smell, you hear, the kinds of sensory engagement that Chloe was just mentioning, looking at the pictures. That idea that going into nature is not necessarily about getting from point A to B, but allowing yourself to really linger and to take the time to center yourself in your experience in terms of your sensory engagement. That's what forest bathing is all about, and it has so many benefits. And it can be done without a guide. It's something you can learn to do on your own. And there are a lot of books about it now. So if you're interested in that, you can dive into that and learn more.
Another really incredible practice in nature is to think about the images that comforted you and grounded you as a child. And I chose this image because I've always been so drawn to dandelions. And as a child, I just remember just being so in awe of how beautiful it was, the way that seeds would float away in the air. And it was something that I did when I was feeling anxious sometimes, was to go outside and just blow dandelion seeds and watch them. And as children, a lot of us intuitively are drawn to different parts of nature, be it a certain plant or a rock or a physical space that spoke to us and helped us feel grounded and helped us feel at home. And a lot of times as adults, we kind of forget to use nature as our ally. When we get sucked into the busyness of life, we can forget to do that. And I have a young son, and it has just been so inspiring and wonderful to watch him. He actually is really into dandelions too. I passed that love on to him. And just children, they always stop to smell the flowers. That's kind of a cliche thing that we all say, but it's so true. And if we can just invite back into our hearts some of that childlike wonder, nature is really there for us to do so. And so one really cool practice too, if you're feeling stressed or you're feeling overwhelmed by life, is to just take some time to think about where you went as a child and what plants you were drawn to, and to even journal about it for a little bit can be a really healing practice. Just writing for 12 minutes has been shown to have a lot of benefits. And so that's something I would invite you to do as you work on reconnecting and building your relationship to nature.
And to build on that, sometimes if you go out into nature and invite yourself to look at everything through the eyes of a child, to turn on that childlike part of yourself and allow yourself just to explore and pick up rocks and kind of wander around as if you're a puppy just sniffing around to find things, because that's what children do. They just let their senses guide them and their own intrinsic curiosity to guide them. And adults, sometimes we feel a little self-conscious doing that, but we have the capacity to be playful in the natural world and allow just our intuition to guide us. And doing that can be so pleasurable. So it can create such a positive state of joy, which in and of itself is a very powerful stress reducer. So we wanted to share with you this interesting nature pyramid that is designed to help people reflect on the frequency and duration of getting out in nature that's going to be most beneficial for your health and well-being. And it deliberately mirrors the food pyramid that you might remember learning about when you were in school. Normally the food pyramid would have lots of fruits and vegetables on the bottom and desserts at the top. This one shows that we want to have lots of daily exposure to natural spaces, whether that's hearing a bird out our window, looking at a green wall at a building across from us in an urban setting, finding a local park in an urban setting, noticing some butterflies landing on plants in small gardens. It does not have to be large-scale parks to connect with nature. So whatever we have around us to give us that daily connection is worth identifying, to think about how you can consciously connect with those spaces on a regular basis. And I can just give an example of that. There is one really large cedar tree near where I live. And one small thing I do when I go to get the mail is I'll just stop for a moment to really look at it. I'll let myself look all the way up to the top of it and down again. And I can take a deep breath while I do that. And it's just a very simple way to ground myself and to remind myself that I'm part of a larger world when I've got a lot of other things going on. A very simple practice that is part of my daily routine and can be very supportive. The second layer of the pyramid is getting out into regional nature, places where there's more green space, less sign of human activity, easier to take an extended period. And as you go up, you're getting into longer periods of time in nature, more remote spaces. And some of us, you know, it may be unrealistic that we're going to go internationally, or even, especially with COVID, it's not very realistic to even leave our region. But the good news is you don't need to get to the top of the pyramid to have a very deep, supportive practice in nature. Even the lower rung here, the lower level of this pyramid, if you were to regularly attend to connecting to those aspects of nature right around you, you're going to see benefits. So we're going to go through some really simple practices now that you can do that are related to that very first level on the pyramid. There's some things that you can do no matter where you live or what the green space is around you. So one practice is to deliberately look for things in nature that just capture your attention because they seem to have some meaning to you. They can represent a metaphor. So for example, looking at this, for me, this is a metaphor for resilience, because here we have a beautiful dandelion, which is sometimes labeled a weed, but actually has a lot of medicinal qualities and is super important for pollinators like bees. Dandelions are actually very beneficial to the ecosystem, and they're so hardy. They can grow in so many different settings, like finding this very small sliver of dirt to grow in. And to me, looking at a dandelion thriving in an urban setting, even though it's labeled a weed and sometimes pulled up, I love the sunny quality of it, and I love the fact that it can grow even in harsh environments. And that gives me a sense of joy. So walking around and looking at nature with the eyes of what messages could the natural world be sending me right now that could be beneficial. It's a way of turning on your own intuitive wisdom and looking for something in the outside world that can mirror back to you something that is wise, the wise aspects of yourself that we don't always stop to listen to. So if you go out and think to yourself, what do I really need to see from nature right now that will help me to have a new perspective, that might help me resolve a challenge that I'm having right now? If you look with that intention, I can guarantee there'll be something in the natural world that will inspire you and help you to reflect on the situation in a new way. Another simple practice, and probably a lot of you do this, whether you're conscious of it or not, is walking in nature as a way to try to turn off loops of negative thought. So in the psychological world, we call those loops rumination. It's when you have a very difficult time turning off thoughts of something that was disappointing or something that was hurtful to you. It might even be thinking about something that happened a long time ago, or concerns about something that you don't even know may or may not happen in the future, but you're just having a very hard time silencing that loop of thought. And it's very useful to find practices to stop those ruminative thoughts, because they can go on to contribute to anxiety and depression. So there was a study that was done at Stanford University that found that people that walked for 90 minutes in a green setting where there were trees in a city park, compared to those that walked for 90 minutes in an urban setting that had more sidewalks and roadside paths, the folks that were in the green areas showed significant decreases in rumination, while those that were in the urban settings really didn't. So the exercise alone was not enough to help the rumination to stop, But when you combine the exercise with the nature all around you, it's a very powerful tool for silencing rumination. So folks that struggle with that, which is a lot of the world right now, I recently read an article that 48% of people right now in the pandemic are struggling with mental health problems. You're certainly not alone if that is a challenge for you. This is a way that you can begin to nurture yourself. And you don't even have to walk for 90 minutes. That's just what they used in the study. But finding a place where you feel comfortable to walk in a green space and to allow yourself to focus on the feel of your feet as you walk, and looking around at the sensory engagement that's possible by just being in the trees, that can really help to turn off your thoughts. And you might notice when you walk out that you are not thinking about the same things that you were thinking about when you walked in. And that can be a fun thing to notice, that you're actually impacting your own mental well-being just by making that decision to get out. And one of the benefits of getting out is you may be fortunate enough to hear bird song. And there's beautiful research that shows that listening to birds is very soothing. It can be very supportive to you emotionally, and interestingly, it can also help you with your attention. It has both an alerting effect and a calming effect. And one of the things I love is you can find free tracks of birdsong online and just play it in the background as a way of giving your that sense of being outside even when you can't be outside. A lot of people love birds and enjoy looking for them. And if this is not something you've done before, it can be one of the ways that you slow yourselves down when you get outside. If you decide that you're going to actually be listening for birds and looking for where they are, that is one way to anchor yourself and deepen your experience in nature.
Earlier, we mentioned the healing benefits of water and the color blue. And so the sound as well has healing properties, the sound of rushing water, just like the bird sounds. And similarly to the bird sounds too, it promotes being around water, promotes feelings of well-being and alertness, decreased depression, better sleep, and also promotes tranquility, calmness, and serenity, and reduces anxiety, and has a physical effect as well, lowering blood pressure and heart rates. And one thing I was reading is a new concept is we all hear about green spaces and wanting to incorporate more green space into urban environments. A new thing being looked at is blue spaces and finding ways to incorporate water features into cityscapes. And it's becoming more and more known and incorporated into architecture that having water features is so beneficial for mental health, and just for folks that don't have access to the ocean, just having a fountain or having a pond creates such a calming experience. So I'm hoping that more blue spaces are around in the future, because I know for me, the ocean and water is probably the most calming thing I can think of possibly being around.
Yeah, just looking at this picture, it's interesting how just looking at water, even a picture of it can feel so good.
And similar to the bird sounds, just having sounds of water playing, if that's the only thing accessible to you in a moment, very beneficial as well.
I know that a lot of people like to hear recordings of water when they're trying to fall asleep, just a continuous loop. There's just so many different ways you can bring sensory input from nature into your daily life that can be really helpful.
Absolutely. And so we talked a little bit earlier about the benefits of having a nature view. So one really incredible study that I recently read about was they looked at people who were recovering in a hospital, and half of the people had just a wall and the other half had a window that had a room that had a view out to trees. And the people that had the window view got out of the hospital faster and also had less pain during their recovery just from having that nature view. And it's, again, as I mentioned earlier, if you can't have a window view and that's not something you can control, you can still have images of nature, and that is really helpful as well. Just 40 seconds of looking out a window has been shown to reduce stress, improve attention, and helps students focus in schools too. So I hope that that can, encourage people to know how important it is for students to take little nature breaks throughout the day, and for us as adults to do so in our daily work lives as well.
One thing that you can think about too is how you've positioned your furniture in your house, because oftentimes the furniture is not positioned to look out a window, but to have a place where it's very easy to look out, to at least put one chair that's comfortable in a space that encourages you to look outward. That can be a simple thing you can do to get more access to nature. And if having a window view is not really compelling to you because of wherever you're living, adding plants has been found to have significant benefits for people. There's even research that having plants can reduce the amount of time you get sick. There was a study that found that classrooms that had plants, children were less absent due to illness, and that actually kids felt more socially connected in rooms with plants, which I thought was amazing. So there's psychological as well as health benefits, physical health benefits to having plants in your environment.
And one I've noticed during the pandemic, I don't know if you've noticed this, Carolyn, but a lot of people have gotten really into plants. And I've seen people saying like, oh, my plants are what are keeping me sane right now. Just caring for my plants and loving my plants. And I think that is our response to the stress we're feeling. We're naturally drawn to cultivating and having more plants around us during this time. So one concept in positive psychology is the concept of savoring. And savoring just means lingering over the positive aspects of an experience and being mindfully engaged and aware of your feelings during positive events. And this, in turn, will enhance the feelings of awe that nature can give us. So for all of the ideas we just talked about, walking, going to water, having plants, and adding the aspect of psychological savoring can just enhance that experience. Another way to enhance the experience of savoring is to talk about it with someone. So if you go into nature with a friend or a family member, just simply pointing out, can you smell the freshness of the air right now? Look how beautiful that tree is. Look how incredible that little bird is over there. Just talking about it is one way to enhance savoring. And the other thing is, I think a lot of us have heard that the brain has a tendency to focus on the negative. And that is how we've been wired evolutionarily. And savoring is a way to kind of counteract the natural tendency of focusing on the negative and try to move us back into a space where we are also focusing on the positive. So the key for this is to not put too much pressure on yourself. You don't have to make the most of every single moment, but simply noticing just the sights and the sounds and the smells around you, just noticing, what about this experience? What about this moment? What about this nature view is enjoyable and pleasurable to me? And just in having the intent to absorb that and let it sink into you and let it fill your body creates more intensity around those positive emotions. And that builds on itself. And that is something that once you begin to intentionally practice it, it can become more natural to you over time. And it's a beautiful habit to start with nature and then hopefully extend out into the other parts of your life as well, like your relationships and your cooking and your home, and all of those different components. But nature is really, I think, designed for this. Because nature in itself inspires so much awe and the feeling of savoring. So it can be a great place to start with this practice.
Mhm. I feel like savoring is closely related to gratitude, because if you start to savor, it's very easy to find yourself in a space of gratitude, which is such a powerful way of counteracting stress.
And another thing we wanted to mention about nature and what is so incredible and powerful about nature is that it lends itself as a perfect way to start a mindfulness practice. For lots of people, folks who have experienced trauma, or all of us just living in this really hectic, fast-paced world, it can feel overwhelming to be asked to focus on your breath or free your mind of thoughts. It can sometimes be actually triggering and counterproductive and a bit flooding. But nature provides an external regulator that kind of can help us get more accustomed to peace and silence and the flow and just being with ourselves in a non-judgmental way. So focusing on things like a stream or the falling leaves or the feelings of the wind on our face, that is being mindful. And it's a great way to start a practice. I know also in working with children, it is a lot more accessible to them to spend time in nature, go out, engage your senses, and ask them to notice what each sense is taking in, rather than asking them to maybe just sit quietly. It's something that can feel more within reach and a great jumping off point for a mindfulness practice.
And the good news is we know from a study that was published actually in 2019 during the summer by a scientific journal that about 120 minutes a week is all we really need to start feeling some real health benefits to being outside. So we've been talking a lot about how the self-care practice can have significant effects. And now we know from the study last year that it only needs to be about 120 minutes, and that they don't have to happen all at once. It could be spread out over the full week. So you might only get 10 minutes one day, another day 20 minutes. But if you can try to get about 120 minutes, that's the threshold number where they found people starting to get significant health and wellness benefits. So you can begin thinking about what's practical for you. It may be only practical to do 5 minutes in the morning, maybe walking a little further to your workplace by parking further away and trying to go a route that has a green space connected with it. It might be pausing after dinner to sit outside and look at the backyard for a little while. It could be something that simple, done with regularity, to get that threshold number of 120 minutes. The other thing we just wanted to mention, which we feel like is very important to acknowledge, is that when we go into nature, the idea that it's not just a space for us to receive benefits, but also to be in reciprocal relationship, that we want to acknowledge that we are part of nature and we have benefits to be gained by seeing ourselves as being stewards of nature and being able to give back and improve the natural environment around us. And that can be so many things. It could be as simple as starting a gratitude practice of going into spaces, acknowledging what they give to you, and going in with a sense of, I want to be respectful of this space and acknowledge how much it matters to me. It could start there. Because I think the thoughtfulness is the beginning of being a deep steward. And it could move up to deciding that you want to change some of the practices in your life that you know don't contribute to a healthy ecosystem as a way of giving back. Or perhaps you find some simple practices like planting native plants that are best designed to support the wildlife in your area. There's so many ways to do this that you can start small and gradually build up, but it is part of that feeling of being in relationship and having it be a two-way street that can deepen your emotional connection to the natural world. And speaking of emotional connection, Chloe, I know you want to share a little bit about this study that shows the more connected we feel, the more we benefit.
Sure. So this is just a short scale that is kind of designed to see how connected people are with nature and how connected they feel towards nature. So it's kind of just a simple way of understanding what we're trying to do with ecotherapy and where we're hoping to get people. Because it's been shown that folks that have a higher nature relatedness score tend to have a much higher subjective feeling of well-being. So it just shows that this one aspect of life, how connected we feel to nature, is directly related to our overall health and specifically our mental health. And so I think it's just showing us that, even if we're feeling not too connected to nature, that's something that we can actively cultivate and move towards.
Yeah, I love how some of the questions point to the fact that it could be cultivated. Like number 4 says, I take notice of wildlife wherever I am. Well, that's something you can consciously decide to do more often. And you can certainly decide that you are going to go out more so that you feel more connected. There's just so many ways to deepen that relationship.
So we just wanted to talk about how nature and nature access has been kind of related to a lot of the grief with the ongoing pandemic. So a lot of us, this whole situation has generated a lot of fear and uncertainty. There's just a lot of us in a state of overwhelm or panic or shut down. A lot of us, our feelings of being kind of trapped or out of control are really triggering ways we felt or experiences we might have had in the past or as children. And as we talked about earlier when Carolyn was mentioning the digital detox, a lot of us are just in such a state of nature deficit already. And now we're asking a lot of people to take their jobs or their school life online. And so people are even more tied to screens. And something that I have just found really hopeful and really showing that people are picking up on the fact that nature is an antidote to all this stress is there was a study that came out that said wildlife refuges have seen 4 times the average number of visitors since the beginning of the pandemic. And people are just flocking to nature as a tool to care for themselves right now more than ever. And I think this just shows that intuitively and innately we reach for nature in times of stress and struggle. And I know that I've noticed just in going to parks, local parks, that they are busier than ever right now. And more people who don't think of themselves as nature people are starting to seek nature out and to use that as a tool in their life. And so it's something that that I think more and more people are becoming aware of as people are feeling more and more stressed. And this kind of ties back to the picture Carolyn showed of the dandelion coming up through the concrete. It's just the idea that nature promotes resilience through all of the psychological benefits that we have talked about, easing symptoms of depression and enhancing memory and cognitive function, reducing stress, and also through viewing nature as a metaphor, like Carolyn mentioned earlier, there is so many examples of nature just remaining flexible and yet strong, finding ways to adapt. Nature, constantly is renewing itself. It's inviting us to shed things that no longer serve us and embrace change, embrace new life. Nature also models for us something that is kind of the opposite of what our society might be modeling. The idea that there are different seasons of life. There are times when we need to rest. There's times when we need to let go, and there's other times when we need to grow. And simply being in nature just reassures us and can teach us these lessons if we are willing to open our eyes and look for them. I know just the way that I see, vines growing and finding different places to go and different places to grow, and the way that that nature just finds a way to work together, and is just so inspiring if we can really keep our eye out for it and let it teach us.
I love that, Chloe. It's so nice to be reminded too that we are nature. We're part of it. And sometimes I think we've gotten so separated we forget that we are actually integral to the natural world as human beings.
Absolutely. And I see so many people right now as it's, getting colder and the days are getting shorter, and a lot of people are like, why am I so tired? Why can't I work as much as I'm used to? And I think just letting ourselves know it's wintertime. This is a season when we naturally kind of hibernate and slow down a little bit. And just letting ourselves know those things can be really reassuring when we're wondering why we're not able to function like a machine. Just to remember that we are nature, we are part of nature. And so along with all of this is just the idea of creating a nature ritual, which is so much more simple than it might sound. And I just wanted to kind of define ritual, which it just means something that you perform at the same time every time. So that could mean daily, weekly, whatever feels right. It can be as simple as walking outside your door each morning and breathing with the trees, kind of how Carolyn said. And it connects us to the interconnectedness of life, the seen and unseen forces. Lots of times rituals are also performed around change. So like during an equinox or a solstice. And what makes it a ritual is that it has intention. So thinking about what thoughts and feelings am I inviting into this moment of action? And then attention. So what perceptions and sensations of the world are we bringing focus to? And then repetition, the idea that you carry it out on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. So some people associate the word ritual with religion, but it really doesn't need to be that. It is really creating a rhythm. And human beings respond to that, to have touch points in our lives that help us to build the meaning and sense of purpose and connection that's so supportive of mental health. So we wanted to share some simple examples of this. So this is a collection tray that I have in my home. It's just a little collection of natural items that I have found over many years, and they just were special to me for whatever reason, that childlike wonder that they inspire. And to have them in my living space and to look at them is really a prompt to remember where they came from. So if I see the nautilus shell, it takes me back to the ocean. If I see the pine cone, it takes me to the forest. If I see the seed pod that looks like a heart, it takes me to a time I was walking with a friend and found it on the ground and was just so delighted because I'd never seen anything like it, and I could shake it and hear the seeds. So letting yourself collect things, as long as they're not the only thing like it that's there, you can know that it's probably okay to pick it up. We want to be mindful that everything in nature has a purpose, even things lying on the ground. So we don't want to take too many things. But if you can look around and get a sense that, yeah, there's many others of these here, it's probably okay for me to take it. Then I think bringing it home and having a special space and continuing that practice of changing it out and looking at it and caring for them like they're treasures can be a very easy and rewarding ritual practice to connect with nature.
I love that. And nature collections are so important to me too, and I have some on my mantle, some in my bedroom, and it just reminds me of just the magic of nature and the different places that are special to me. And speaking of special places, we wanted to, this image is representing the idea of a sit spot, which is a spot that you regularly return to in nature, and you go and cultivate a relationship with a specific spot. If you do so long enough, you might get to see the different seasons of that spot, and also just kind of like a relationship, feeling that it's a friend that's there for you. And I know for myself, as a new mother during this pandemic, I have just leaned on nature, and in particular, this one sit spot so much to kind of ground me and return to when I'm feeling just overwhelmed and stressed. And I love to go to this one place in the park nearby our house. And I remember this one morning, I was just feeling so overwhelmed and so stressed. And I think my son was also feeding off that energy and teething and having a hard time. And we went to that spot and just watched the leaves fall. And he just started laughing and laughing about the falling leaves. And it was just such a wonderful, beautiful moment where I just felt my state shift so distinctly. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about nature, is that it can shift our mental and physical and emotional state so quickly. And the other thing I wanted to say about sit spots is it's also a lovely practice you can cultivate with children, and letting them choose a spot that calls to them and returning there. And depending on their age, developing practices around noticing the different things around them, maybe journaling, and maybe even kind of like starting with just 5 minutes and then the next time 15 minutes, and just kind of going deeper into your sit spot over time.
I love that. It's a great way to build memories and associations to keep returning. So we're winding down now, and we wanted to just take a minute to reflect on the concept of park prescriptions. This is a movement that's been going across the country. Doctors are starting to prescribe nature as part of well checks with their patients, the same way they might prescribe exercise or a pharmaceutical, because of the fact it does have evidence-based effects. So we are thinking that we don't have to go to a doctor to know what is good for us in terms of getting out into nature. You intuitively know what you need to do, how often you need to go to start feeling effects. So we want you just to reflect for a minute. If you were to write a prescription for yourself, where would you go? How often would you go? And what will you do when you're there? So in thinking about this, I can just give an example. For me, I know that I really need to get outside every day, even if it's for a small amount of time. I just need to carve it in some way. And I will either go to the park that's just down the road, or I'll just spend some time standing by a tree, like I mentioned earlier, by the mailbox. And I'm going to commit to doing this every day. And when I'm there, I really try to take that mindful approach that we talked about with forest bathing, to just be really open to my sensory experience. And that is enough of a park prescription for me. And you may find that for you that you want to add more detail, but whatever will help you to scaffold a new habit and a new commitment, I think is really beneficial. Because again, like we said in the beginning, so much of our wellness is the intentional self-care that we take on in our lives. And it does take some planning, and it does take some forethought to develop a new habit in our lives. And speaking of new habits, I have always loved these little Sweetgum tree seed pods. They are just playful and fun to me. But I also think they're a metaphor of how nature protects something new, because it has little spikes on it so that maybe it won't be as likely to be eaten by a bird or some kind of a small mammal. So that seed that's inside there has a better chance of being planted. So nature even understands that it takes a while for something new to get rooted. It needs some protection and care. So you might think about, how can I be kind to myself and how can I protect my intention to get into nature? How can I start this practice in a way that feels joyful and life-giving and hopeful to me, the way nature protects seeds that are going to grow into beautiful large trees. And we can just begin with something small. So we encourage you, if you would like to learn more about self-care in nature or ecotherapy, or would like to give us some feedback on this presentation, you can reach us at info@wildrock.org. And we hope that you will use the time that you've taken today to start something new, maybe do something small today for yourself, getting out into nature. And we are grateful that we had this chance to share our love of nature and our belief in its transformative power with you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Chloe. I so love spending this time with you and having this opportunity to share our common love of nature.